As the war in Afghanistan came to a close in 2021, every generation was trying to reconcile within themselves and their peers with how it was ending. There seemed to be two camps, those who felt we had invested too much, and those who said we still had promises to fulfill. Where we all seemed to agree was that no one wanted or was prepared for it to end the way that it did. As our military valiantly scrambled to leave Kabul airport, the explosion at Abbey Gate killed 13 of our service members. All but one were Gen Z. For much of the older generation, war was all we knew, but Gen Z had only been coming in for a few years, the oldest of them only 4 when 9/11 happened. Losing them this way, for this reason, at the end of our very long and painful chapter, yet at the beginning of theirs, seemed even more wrong. The Gen Z that are entering today have no personal experience or context of the global war on terrorism or the Afghanistan withdrawal. In that sense, there is a chasm growing between those who've carried the weight of the longest war in American history and those who have a new, fresh perspective on what it means to serve the nation. As time passes, the chasm will only grow bigger as those who know will begin to feel more other, and those who don't risk seeing them as just another generation of veterans with their stories of war. With all this talk about Gen Z motivations, the recruiting crisis, and more, I wondered about the Gen Z that entered the force before the end of those 2 decades of war. What motivated them to come in, and how did the Afghanistan exit impact their very fresh perspectives of this career and lifestyle? I invited Aidan Gunderson, a Gen Z soldier deployed to Afghanistan during the withdrawal, to share his deeply personal story of what happened at Abbey Gate, as well as how it affected his view of service. I'm Corie Weathers. You're listening to Military Culture Shift, a limited series podcast on the impact of war, money, and generational perspective on morale, retention, and leadership. Aidan, you were a part of 82nd, going over, deployed, I think, a couple of times, right? But specifically deployed to Afghanistan. So first of all, just thank you for being willing to share your story and for your time in service. You're doing a lot of things now that you're out. But I think to start, Aidan, I would just love to hear your story on what made you want to join the military in the first place.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to tell my story. It means a lot. I can't even really remember like the initial thing of why I wanted to join the Army, but it's all I've ever thought about since I was a kid. My mom was a medic in the Army as well. In the early 90s, she was also a medic. She flew around in helicopters, was stationed in Korea, and she always just told me stories that I thought was super cool. I always looked up to her. Being in the Army, I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And so I think that's probably what started it, but I don't remember ever wanting to do anything different. I was maybe going to go ROTC for a while to go to the college that I really wanted to go to. Maybe my mom tried to convince me to go Air Force for a long time. She was Army, but it was like, your life's going to be easier in the Air Force. And of course she was right, but I was full gung-ho motivated for the Army. And I was going to go infantry. I was all infantry out. But when I went to MEPS, they told me that there was no infantry slots available. I think that might have just been because my ASVAB score was high. Who knows? There's always infantry slots. But they gave me the option. I also really wanted to be airborne because of, I think, like everybody my generation, because of Band of Brothers. I really wanted to be airborne infantry. But since they didn't have infantry, they offered me some computer jobs. They offered me tanker, but the only option was for airborne was to be a medic, and that was a pretty easy choice for me. I was also a junior firefighter at the time. I was doing EMT, volunteer EMT work, kind of before I could take my NREMT test because I was only 16 and 17. So that was an easy choice for me. I was like, oh yeah, I'll be a medic. That's easy enough, and especially with the airborne contract. So I did the delayed entry program. I signed the paperwork when I was 17. My mom had to sign saying I could go. That was in October of my senior year, and then graduated in May. And by June I was off the basic. And my school is really small. My graduating class was like 35, and pretty much nobody was going military. It's very athletic and academic focused kind of school. And like, my school counselor didn't really know what to do with me because I had already signed up for the military, and I still had to take like senior seminar classes, like applying to school and stuff. And I was like, I already have signed the contract. Like, I'm going to the Army. But yeah, so I think it was different. I think because of my mom, I think there was just a sense of, and living in a small town, like I just wanted to get out and go explore and do some cool stuff.
Now you're 22, right?
I'm 22. Yeah, 23 in a couple of days actually.
20. Happy birthday, almost birthday. Curious because you're considered an older Gen Z. I think Gen Z is probably 20, 25, 26 now. Yeah. So what do you think about that? Do you see yourself, does Gen Z and the way that Gen Z is characterized resonate with you? I
don't think so. I think maybe I'm close. I feel like I'm closer to millennial. You know, I joined the Army in 17, so I was around a lot of people that were not my age. And I think because of that and, you know, 2 early deployments, it made me mature faster. So everybody thought I was always like, even though I had a baby face up, everybody kind of thought I was like 24, 25, you know, and being in those leadership roles early, I think that helped. So I don't really feel like I identify with any of these younger generations, but I don't know. It feels weird to kind of identify with the generation.
Okay, so you go in as a medic. When was your first deployment and where did you go?
So I went through medic school and I got stationed with 1st Brigade, 82nd, 2504 Battalion. And I think within a year, we went to Iraq. So 82nd is, and probably, you know, for the future will be on QRF, which is like Global Response Force or something. That has a ton of different acronyms for it. And I was actually at my buddy's house in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was like the 31st of December. So it was like just about to be 2020. And we got the call early that morning because the Iranian-backed militia was like overtaking the embassy in Baghdad. So that was the first time we got activated or deployed. And within 18 hours, we were on a plane out of the country. So that was wild. That was a pretty crazy deployment. We weren't there for long. We touched down in Iraq and we were there for about 2 months. We left I think towards the end of February, and went back to Kuwait. And luckily we got back to the States before COVID happened. So most of our brigade got stuck in Kuwait.
So did you experience most of COVID at home then?
Yes, actually pretty much all of it. COVID, and then we actually, the second time we got deployed, if you call it, I call it more of an activation, was when the Million Man March was happening in DC. Trump pressed the button for us once again, and we went up to DC. This time it was only for a week. We were really there as a third line of defense. Like if the police got overran, then the National Guard got overran. But it, you know, I think as you know, nothing crazy happened. So we sat there in a gym in Fort Belvoir, I think, in Virginia, near DC. We sat there for about a week and came back. And that's when COVID really happened, because us living all in that tight space, like so many people got COVID from that. And that's, I think after that is when we really went into like lockdown mode. And I was in the barracks at that time. So we were just living in the barracks, not going to work.
What was your experience of being in the military? Did you enjoy it? Were you glad that you made the choice?
Yeah, I was super glad. And I still, even though I got out after 4 years, I didn't do the time that I thought I was going to do. I would never change it for a million years. I met amazing people. I did some amazing experiences, but it really just wasn't all that I thought it was, you know. Like I kind of drank the Kool-Aid as a kid, as we say, and the Army ads got me, and I thought it was this cool guy stuff. And I did some really cool guy stuff, but when you're not doing that, it's just different, you know. And I don't want to like dog the Army, because I still do like the Army and I appreciate my service, but I just didn't feel like I was getting treated like I should. I was getting paid like crap. I was living in barracks. I probably should have been condemned. You know, and that kind of led into COVID, where we were stuck in the barracks drinking a lot, and that turned into, you know, depression and stuff like that. So I don't think it was necessarily all the Army's fault I got out, but I definitely, you know, after that and then Afghanistan and everything that happened after that, I was not ready to sign back up. I was like, I'm not going to be, you know, a hand for the U.S. government anymore.
Did you always feel like you were only going to do the 4 years, or did you leave it open-minded in case that you wanted to do more?
Yeah, I left it open-minded, but I definitely, like, if you would ask me in middle school, I've been like, I'm doing 20 years. Are you kidding me? Of course, I can retire when I'm 37. But that's easy to say when you have no idea what the job is and you've never done it before. So I left it open-minded. It was actually the decision to get out was hard. It was hard for me. I remember it took a long time to decide what I was going to do. A lot of factors led into the decision that I felt right about, and I still don't regret getting out. I met my wife, and I always knew, like, dual military it's hard. And I met her when she was in ROTC as a cadet. So like about a month after I got out, she commissioned. So that would have been kind of also weird. I would have been a specialist. She would have been a lieutenant.
So is she still in?
She is. Yep. She's still.
So that would make you a military spouse then?
Yep. I'm a military spouse now.
By the way, how do you feel now that you're a military spouse? Or do you kind of stay disconnected?
Oh, it's kind of funny, having a dependent ID now, because the jokes about dependents. There's a ton of them. But I feel good. I mean, I'm like, for a while I wanted to distance myself a lot from the Army, and I was ready just to never think about it again, especially after Afghanistan. But it is kind of nice to be close to the culture a little bit, because I understand the culture, obviously. She can come home and talk to me about military stuff, and I understand it, which I think is helpful for her. And I always found helpful having a girlfriend at the time that understood military stuff. So I like it now. It's sometimes I have to go on post and I see the people doing PT, and it's funny now. I just laugh kind of. I was like, oh, it's sucks for you guys.
Has your perspective changed at all? Like, are you experiencing any of the difficulty on the spouse side that maybe you didn't see or experience before when you were active duty?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I stay at home right now. I'm starting school soon. But for the past year, I've been working for the OAR. So I've been at home. So I get the spouse coming home. They, being in especially at 82nd, I was gone all the time. So coming home and then having, Katie, like, basically I don't know, how's the right way to say this? Like, really, she just basically wanted more attention from me, but I'd been working like for 12 hours. So I was exhausted. And I definitely see it from the point of view of a spouse now. I'm at home all day. I'm waiting for Katie to come home. And then, and she comes home and all she wants to do is not talk for an hour because she's been talking all day. And so I get that part a lot now. I understand the perspective of the spouse a lot, and how it's like, I have to be patient with myself, because I have to be like, she just got home from work, let her chill before you bombard her with love and affection, which I get, because I was the same way. After social situations just drain me.
Okay, so why don't we talk a little bit about Afghanistan? Why don't you tell a little bit about what was happening, especially as the tensions were starting to rise, and what that experience was like from your perspective? I know for us, I feel like when things were starting to build up, I don't know, there was kind of like this, the only way I know how to describe it is like a dissonance, like this part of you that just is ready for it to be done. Like, it's been 2 decades and just wanting it to be done. And then another part of you that wants it to be done right or done well. So there was kind of a lot of feelings going on. And I know that's probably for a lot of people who, remember 10 to 15, 20 years worth. Whereas here you're kind of coming in as kind of a fresh service member. So what was your experience, especially as tensions started to rise with Afghanistan? What were you feeling? What were other people feeling around you?
Well, like I said, we were, QRF, so we didn't know we were going to Afghanistan until we were on the flight to Afghanistan. The OPSEC is a big deal with these things. So they don't really tell us lower enlisted what's going on for obvious reasons. But there's always the grumblings and the rumors, and word gets down. And I was a senior medic at the time for an infantry company, which is like the goal. That was the job that I wanted. I had done my junior line time. I had done some clinical time. So I felt good in my position, and I loved my company. I loved my first sergeant. But I didn't want to deploy again, to be honest. When we got back from Iraq, I had met a lot of friends over there, a lot of friends from other countries, because we ended up working at the aid station basically there for 2 months. And my Scottish friend named Brody was killed when we got back. On March 11th, there was a right like where we were staying. They shot rockets over the wall and killed her. So that was like the first experience I had with the reality of war, because a lot of that deployment was just kind of sitting there doing nothing. And that, it kind of scared me, you know, I'm not afraid to say that. And so the thought of going to Afghanistan on a, you know, on a level like this of who knows what's going to happen, not just kind of a typical 9-month one, was scary, you know. And we heard rumors about maybe going to Africa, maybe going to Ukraine before all the war started. So none of it sounded good. You know, I felt confident in myself and my junior medics and my company. But I didn't want to go anywhere. I was getting pretty close to getting out, or thinking I was going to get out. And we couldn't really talk about it because I would try to get out my first sergeant, like, what's going on with Afghanistan? And he didn't really even know. Yeah, and it was weird. And coming, I was, you know, 1 year old when 9/11 happened. So like my understanding of that we were at a war was already when everything kind of had died out. You know, I was maybe in middle school or late elementary school, and I was like, we're in 2 wars right now. What do you mean? Nobody's talking about it. So I have I think a different perspective. I don't have that you know, motivation that a lot of the older, you know, my first sergeant and those guys who joined right after 9/11 do. And then really when we got to Afghanistan, that's when it was like all that stuff, like what you were saying with the thoughts of how is the GWAT going to end? This is going to end. You know, that was like all obviously way more present in my mind when we were on the ground there. So we basically were the first plane, we were maybe the first or second plane that landed with 82nd troops. And that was the night of the 15th. And then I was on the last 3 planes out of the country. There's 3 planes that left all at the same time on the 31st. And I was on one of those. So I was there for, you know, 2 weeks.
Aidan, there was so much happening in that 2 weeks. Like I've heard people call it like just 2 weeks of chaos. I mean, and it was on the service side, even back here in the US, it was crazy. I mean, you had, you know, even former generals calling, you know, lower ranking people to try to like help out. It was just everything.
We got involved with that too.
Yeah, I mean, everything, the military is so known for structure and hierarchy and order, and as much as possible, right? And this was so not that, right? No. Which I think was also foreign. So,
well, yeah, it was crazy. And excuse if I laugh when I talk about the chaos. It's just, you know, coping mechanism. I'm sure we all have. Yeah. But yeah, it was crazy. It was all insane. I remember we landed and it was calm, so that was crazy. And as we were getting in there, you know, it looked like a ghost town. Like everybody was getting out of Dodge. Like there was nobody there. People were like, we had found the clinic as medics. We were like, let's stock up on medical equipment. So we kicked the door down on the clinic and we started loading our bags. And there was like coffee on the table. You know, somebody was doing a blood draw and there was like blood on the table. Like everybody just left on a snap. Like every building that you walked into on that side of base, it was like World War Z, basically. That's how we described it. Because everybody it looked like they just disappeared. Like it was some Twilight Zone stuff. And, you know, that first night was calm. We were all like, we're in Afghanistan. This is crazy. You know, there's tracers going up from the city, like shooting all around us. We're like, are they going to shoot at us? But yeah, the chaos didn't really start till that next day. I didn't see the people fall from the planes, but I saw the bodies afterwards. And they were real mangled, still smoking from when they hit the tarmac and like skid. That's really when it kicked it off, I think.
Kicked it off for you as far as the
feeling
of craziness.
Sure. Yeah. Because I saw those bodies and just seeing the airfield with like a mass of thousands of people, of just civilians, you know, it almost looked like we were in like a conventional war, but with just like civilians. Because, you know, we weren't shooting at them, obviously, but there was just MRAPs and people and vehicles and just pushing these crowds back and then having to push back because it was an insane thing to witness.
When you first arrived there, were all the crowds descending on the airport already, or it was the next day that they all were flooding?
Yep, it was the next day because it was that night, and we were hearing over the radios, and comms were so bad. But we would hear some things of like, you know, a group of 5 squeak through the airport, let's get them out. And I think just overnight, slowly, they started getting in. And then when the sun came up and the Taliban started putting pressure on the backside of that mass, it just forced them all into the airport. And it felt like kind of all at once, really. I wasn't on the airfield when that was going on. But yeah, so it was calm at first, but it was not calm for long.
Did you find yourself kind of going into what a lot of people do in that kind of crisis situation where you just kind of go into whatever needs to get done? You know, like something clicks in your mind where you just get to work, right? Because you can't have a ton of emotion when there's so much to do or when there's chaos happening. Did you feel yourself doing that? Or was there these moments, these pockets of kind of emotion coming up and realizing what was going on? Because this is not your normal, like you described, it's not your normal even combat situation.
No, I knew that from the beginning. And I remember having thoughts of like, this is not good. What are we doing? You know, because as a medic, I wasn't on the line. I wasn't pushing people. I wasn't getting people out. I was focused on my guys, and I was focused on treating any civilians that needed it. So no, I was from the beginning. And I think this is kind of a cliche thing to say nowadays. I think I have a lot of empathy. My mom put me in therapy when I was really young, which I'm glad for her. So I think I'm very connected with how the emotions in my head work, at least. And from the beginning, I was like, this is bad. Like it feels like, I said it many times, it felt like we were fighting the civilians more than the Taliban, you know, and there was reports of us maybe calling in the Taliban to help us control the civilians. And I remember seeing like women getting like trampled by crowds and like dropping their babies and just being like, what the hell? And I think, you know, the grunts and a lot of us were in that mode of like, we got to get this done. We have to secure this airfield, but nobody was okay with it. Nobody was okay with, you know, shouting it at a family, pointing your weapon at them, saying like, get back. Like nobody was okay with that, you know, and especially not on the way back.
How did you manage yourself being a medic and seeing people getting hurt? Like, I imagine if I were in that situation, like there's only one of me, like, how do I help where I'm supposed to help? And how do I not help when it's something I could be helping with? Like, how did you manage that?
You kind of just can't have to think about it, you know, help where you can. And that's kind of the big thing about the moral injury that my foundation deals with is there's a lot of times where we couldn't, you know, there's triple strand wire in front of us and we're watching a baby, like, you know, get dehydrated or a woman get beat, you know, there's things you just couldn't do. So I think I turned a lot of my focus onto my guys because that's what I could do. I could control my guys.
You know, most people, when they go through something horrendous like that, one of the things that I think a majority of our force is really good at is there's positives too that come out of that. There's like these other memories of working with the small circle of people that you were with that experienced that with you. And I mean, our tribe is small enough that if you've been to Afghanistan, let's say, that's one circle of people, like you get something, you get it, right? But there's a whole other circle of people that if you were there for that, like that's an entirely different, like sacred experience that very few people could ever understand unless you were there, right?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming a bond, but there's also some of these sweeter moments that came out of that. So would you be comfortable sharing what is this other part too that you what lingers for you from that experience?
Well, there's a lot that lingers, but there's a lot of good that I have to kind of force my brain to focus on. And you were kind of talking about it earlier, like we got involved with Operation Pineapple Express kind of on accident, if you know what that is, Scott Mann's NGO kind of thing. And at one point we had a congressman on my first sergeant's phone talking to us about getting his TERP out. And that spiraled into us. That's basically was our big job, is pulling people out of Abbey Gate for people that were trying to get their TERPs out. And that was kind of I don't know, maybe this isn't very, but I'll say like the morality that we held on to, because there's so much negative that we had seen and experienced and done already, that pulling these people out and taking them to where they could get processed and get on another plane was what we held on to, you know. And I counted every single one of those persons in my head. We pulled 333 people out and got them there. And after we would drop them off, my CEO would be like, "Doc, how many is that?" And I'd be like, 128 or whatever. And the look of gratitude that these people had when we would get them to the State Department and get them processed was, I don't think I'll ever see that amount of gratitude. You know, we basically, in a lot of these people's eyes, we just saved their life. You know, they had just gone through however long a day's journey of getting past the Taliban, getting through these crazy mobs that were killing people just because of how many people they were. Like if you fell down, there's a good chance you were not going to get back up because of how dense these crowds were. So they had just been through this epic journey of a lifetime, and this U.S. service member with the baby face pulled them out and got them there. And so they were just so thankful. They did. The hand over the heart is big there. So they just like, thank you, thank you. They could not say thank you enough. And knowing in that moment and being present, like I was like, I need to remember these faces. I have to remember this because it's not the only good thing that I think we could take away from it. So I remember a lot of their faces. I remember them saying thank you. I remember giving the little kids cookies and stuff. Like those things stay with me, and those things help a lot. But not everybody had that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the Pineapple Express was one of those moments that is just like, the story is unbelievable, right? Yeah. And the leadership and the way everybody worked together is remarkable. And again, like I feel like that's the part that lingers for me, is despite the disorganization, despite like it's not about politics. It's really just comes down to our force was in a really, really tough spot, and when it came down to fulfilling or being people of their word and doing what they said that they would do, they were going to do everything possible to live up to the character that they had talked about, but also kind of promised to people. And I think that is promised. remarkable to watch.
It's another great shining moment in all of this is how many veterans, to the bad, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, to the, they ran out their bank accounts, they put their lives aside, they put their mental health aside to get their interpreters and their Afghan families out, and their brothers basically that they had fought and in Afghanistan for years. They came together to get those people out and fulfill those promises, that the government was, there was a lot going on. I don't want to, badmouth the government too much, but they weren't doing it, like there's people on the other side of the wire. Like I had a dude hold up his North Carolina driver's license to me. And I was like, hey man, I had a perfect English accent. He was like, hey, can I get out of here? Like I live in North Carolina. So seeing the people back home just step up and be like, I'm not going to give up on these people. Like I have to get these people out is really amazing. It definitely gives credit to our community. It's like, when the government fails, or not necessarily fails us, but lets us down, we take our own action and step up, which is really cool.
Well, and I think the point of you sharing your story is not so that we can be a voyeurist and swim through all the negativity of it. But before we kind of go to how you've transformed your life after that's happened, you're a medic and you are there in Afghanistan as it's really falling apart. Do you mind sharing what your experience was at Abbey Gate when the bomb went off?
Yeah, we got lucky. We were going right to where the bomb went off. We were looking for another family, and we knew that the gate was closing like within an hour, and so we were like, all right, this is going to be our last one. We're at 333 right now. Let's see how many. Let's see if we can get a couple more. And right before we left, my first sergeant was like, I'll smoke a cigarette. They just got back from a meeting, so we were like, let's smoke a cigarette. And I was like, all right, so we smoked a cigarette. Pretty sure that might have saved our lives a little bit, or almost fully, because without that, we would have gotten in the trucks and went, and we would have been significantly closer, if not right next to it. Because I was about only 50 meters to 100 meters away behind a big, tall T-wall, so I wasn't close to the shrapnel, but I was, fairly close to the blast. And that was a hard day. I remember going up, I treated a lot of U.S. casualties, which, is basically what you train for your entire life as a medic. But I never wanted to do my job. Yeah. I would have been perfectly fine never treating any American casualties. And it was hard. There was a lot of wounded. I worked kind of outside in, so I saw a lot of minor injuries. One of the first Marines I treated his face had been hit with shrapnel, so his face was all blown off, and his right arm needed a tourniquet. And let me tell you something about Marines, man. They don't shy away from it. It took me maybe 15 seconds to get to the casualties, and every single casualty had 2 or 3 grunts on them, not medics, but grunts. They were doing whatever the hell they could do to help them. So I was at one point, I had 2 casualties. I had the guy with his face blown off. I was kneeling, putting my knee behind him, so he wasn't like choking on his own spit, choking on his own blood. I was assessing like ball bearing wounds, making sure they were putting tourniquets on right. And a lot of it, it's funny is I'm actually going to call my first sergeant this weekend and say, I don't remember a lot of it. He was like, do you remember this? And I was like, no.
Mm-hmm.
And the closer we got, the worse the injuries got, yeah, there was just a lot of blood, and there was a lot of people all over the ground. That Abbey Gate smelled like feces and piss most of the time because they didn't have anywhere else to go. But now it just smelled like iron.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing one image that really sticks out to me is a big family. They came running through Abbey Gate. The mom was holding just like a baby. They were all just covered in blood. And I remember the Marines like holding up their weapons, like, get back, because my first thought, and every Marine's first thought probably was secondary attack, that's their big MO. So as these civilians were running up to us just for trying to get help, they almost got smoked. I was like, in my head, I remember thinking like, oh, these guys are all about to get gunned down. But they didn't, they listened. But yeah, it was just crazy sad. There's bodies everywhere. And by this point I had treated a couple, I had loaded a couple in trucks. Our vehicle, the one we had taken down, was like a Toyota Hilux, had backed up. So I grabbed the casualty that I was working on, put him in the back. Somebody else put another casualty in the back, and then somebody else put a litter basically across the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy was really messed up. Like bandages are on his head, but it was already like brain matter. It was kind of already leaking through. And I knew a lot of my company knew where the U.S. clinic was, but I was like, these guys need to go to the hospital, like the Norwegian hospital, and which was right next to the PAX terminal, basically where we were taking a lot of these people.
Mm-hmm.
So I got in the front to direct towards the hospital because nobody knew where it was really. They didn't know exactly where it was. So I asked one guy to get in the back and hold the litter, which, probably should have been me. Probably should have been the medic back there and not a grunt, but I had to direct to the hospital. So we drove to the hospital. I remember telling he's not even a grunt, actually. He's a supply cage guy, and he was driving. He was just going, fuck, and I was like, buddy, I need you to focus. I need you to drive fast and carefully. Like there was no time for freaking out. We have 3 casualties back there. Like we need to get them to the hospital. Mm-hmm. And he did. He was shaking. I think he almost stalled the clutch a couple times, but we made it. We almost stalled right on the airfield because we had to go across the airfield to get to the hospital. And I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure my truck was one of the first ones to get to that hospital because there were still people just walking around by the hospital. I had to get out and like scream, and I sprinted in front of the vehicle, probably like not too far, 100 meters or something, because everybody was kind of just standing around. I was like screaming at them and yelling, and we got to the hospital, and I think they were prepared because as soon as I yelled, I have 3 casualties, like 15 doctors came pouring out of it. And I sat there, and one of the Marines was in the back. He had tourniquets on his legs, just covered in blood, like both of his pant legs were basically just red. And I held his hand, and he basically just squeezed my hand and screamed like, I don't want to die. I don't want to die, like on repeat. And that was like probably the first time that my head kicked in, because up to that point it was all training. Yeah. It felt like I was watching my body do these tasks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that happens a lot in these kind of scenarios. But that was the first point I was holding that Marine's hand. I was like, oh shit. Yeah. Which is crazy to say because I've been, 30 minutes. I've been treating people. I was like, this is fucked. Excuse my language. Okay. This is bad, because I had this poor Marine who was probably my age screaming, I don't want to die. Just, pleading for his life, which you don't normally see unless somebody's actually pleading for their life. It's a different kind of scream, And I just reassured him. I was like, we're at the hospital. We'll get you in there. And they got him in the hospital, and we went back. It was scary. Going back, I was like, I don't know what we're going to see. And I remember as I was walking back up, I saw my platoon sergeant at the time my medical platoon sergeant and my PA. And they were kind of standing around, and I was talking to them, kind of debriefing what was going on a little bit. I remember seeing 2 litters come out with blankets folded over them, and Marines carrying them to the back, basically to where nobody was. And as a medic, that's where you get trained to, the dead Americans, you take them away from everybody, so so people don't see that, And I remember seeing that, and that was another moment. I was like, well, we definitely have some KIA, and obviously, it turned out to be 13. Yeah, it was a hard day,
I
but
mean, you're so young. I mean,
I
you're
was
so
21.
young to have that. And I don't mean that in a minimizing way. I mean,
No,
like,
no.
you're so young to go through that level of trauma. And yet I know that we send troops all the time to war that are 19, 20 years old.
Oh yeah, there was plenty of people who were born after 9/11 there.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that anybody else hasn't experienced that, but I just want to like normalize that, like you said at the very beginning, there's a maturity that you have gained by the time that you've spent in, where you have faced life and death and had conversations like you just described, and that changes a person. We all hope, and I think the biggest question that people have when they come out of their own trauma, or when they are bringing back with them moral injury, which is what I would love for us to talk about next, is there's a lot of questions there that you have to wrestle with and process. And when you're that young, you just are marked and changed by it. And so why don't you share a little bit about after you got home? I know for a lot of the force, it was just a really interesting time. You were there, so once you were back home, what was it like for you after that?
Well, it was weird, I remember after that, what do you do after something like that?
Yeah.
We pulled our company back to where we were, which was outside of Abbey Gate, and we prepared for another possible mass attack. And as we were kind of setting up and everything cooled down for the night, I remember sitting there smoking cigarettes with my buddies, and we were like, "What the fuck was that?" And we were all like laughing, like, "What the fuck?" Like, how do you recover for something like that? And all I was thinking in my head is like, I hope this doesn't change me too much, because obviously I'm sure it did, and it has. But coming home, I wanted to just never think about it again. I think a lot of people, that happens. I just wanted to, especially after we cleaned up the airport for the Taliban to take over, we cleaned up trash and spray painted over the graffiti and shit, which was just a kick in the nuts on the way out.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just kind of wanted to forget about it. Leadership didn't want to talk about it. Leadership didn't want to give us the awards that we deserved, and still haven't given a lot of people the awards they deserve.
Really? You're still waiting?
Well, I didn't. I got my award. I actually got a Bronze Star for Abbey Gate, which I'm very thankful for. But none of my junior medics were there at the gate longer than I was, because I left. They were there treating kids with shrapnel wounds and little babies, holding like them and trying to comfort their mothers. They don't have anything. They don't have any. They got like an AAM or anything, but we didn't get any combat action badges. That goes into the whole controversy of Abbey Gate, that we didn't get shot at. But I can tell you for a fact we got shot at. There's people that were injured who were shot. So that was also just kind of like no recognition after something like that, makes you really salty and jaded, I think. And while I was still in, I still had a couple more months. There was even more talks about going to Ukraine and possibly deploying again. And the thought of that like made me have like panic attacks, which I never really had before. That's how I was really scared. I didn't want to go back at all. So I was like, get the fuck out of here as fast as we can. I cannot deploy again. I was so scared. And when I got out of the military, it was the same thing. I just put it all away. It just was like, I'm not thinking about it. And I didn't like turn to drugs or alcohol, like crazy. There was a couple nights, you get too drunk, you starts pouring out. But really, I put it away, and I thought I was all right until August 26th of last year was the tipping point. I broke down bad because I wasn't doing anything. And I remember seeing people were getting together.
This would have been a 1-year anniversary, right?
This was the 1-year anniversary last year, yeah. I wasn't with my boys. I was alone. I was with my wife, but she's been through a lot because of this too, but she wasn't there with me, which I'm thankful for, obviously. But yeah, August 26th is really like last year, 2022 is when it really kind of just came to a point. And I don't think I think a lot of my friends have told me that as well. And that's when all the emotion came out. That's when all the like this, like I need to probably see somebody, like this is definitely affecting me more. And like I said in the beginning, like up to that point, I think I understood how my brain worked fairly well. But after this, I don't, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So the last year has been a lot of like self-reflecting, going to therapy, just trying to figure out how this changed me and how to navigate in a world now that I'm changed. You know what I mean? It almost feels like, I don't know. It's like my whole brain chemistry has changed, it seems. And not in obvious ways. Like I don't have night terrors. I'm not like, fighting people at bars, getting really drunk. It's just like the way I react to things is different. Because of what we saw and what we did. It's weird. And because it's not PTSD, I don't think, or, it has its touches of PTSD, but I think it's a lot of that moral injury and just, and not knowing.
What do you feel like it is? Like if don't worry about like labels and what other people would categorize it, but, what is it that you feel like maybe somebody else is listening right now who maybe they're on the fringes of it, not necessarily meeting all of the marks for PTSD, and it is a little bit of that moral injury. So how would you describe it in a way that maybe somebody else listening could go, like, that's what I'm going through too?
Well, and I think it was just the foundation of a lot of what I knew was shooken and changed. I watched women holding babies just get mercilessly beat by the Taliban, and I watched people get shot in the head. I witnessed things that you see in movies that don't affect you, but then you see them in real life and you're like, holy shit, what the fuck, So I think just having that the core of that, my perspective on everything has changed. I was gung-ho Army for so long. I was gung-ho going to war. I wanted to be an infantryman. I wanted to kill people. I wanted to do all that. And then seeing the reality of that, it just changed everything. So it has really shook my perspective on myself, even, and like wanting to like go and kill people. Like that's crazy to me now. Like I'm so like anti-war and anti all of that, because I saw the effects up close and personal, and it's ugly. It's really, really ugly. And that those 2 weeks were kind of unique. But I don't know what it is. I think that's what it is. Just a shaking of core beliefs, totally. And now coming back here, it's weird because everything, the first world problems are real. You know what I mean? Like all the things I used to worry about don't matter. All the things I hear people complaining about, maybe on the news or on social media, it's like, how does that even matter? And especially the first year after Afghanistan, like I remember, like trying to get a job and like I was working construction for a little bit, and my boss like freaked out one day because I didn't put silicone around the edge of a toilet. Like he got freaked out at me. And all I could think about was like, less than a year ago, I was like holding dead babies, and like I was in Afghanistan pulling people out of a shit canal, trying to flee their country, or they would have gotten killed. So that is just, it's
now
hard
getting
to
yelled at because of silicone.
Yeah, it's just something so trivial, and it's weird. And like I said, I don't know how my brain works as much. So just trying to navigate that in the modern world is
and if I can just encourage you for a second, that your brain works, I think, completely the way that it's supposed to. And there are things that I think that your brain processes when you're ready and able to process it. And I think there are other things that don't make sense until you're at a place where you're ready to make sense of it. And some of that comes with life and being married for maybe a while. And what's difficult is there's no way to describe the worst of what humanity can do to each other. It just disrupts the whole system.
Yeah.
It seems like the only way to start the healing process on that is to do the opposite and somehow model and be the best of what humanity has to offer. And I think that's why you have those two sides of your brain. One that is trying to process why and how people could be so harmful and terrible to each other. And then the other part of your brain is the best of humanity is the only way to somehow match that. It's the only thing that's somewhat powerful enough to match it. Does that make any sense? Let me say it this way. There is no cognitive talk therapy that can necessarily heal what you saw, because it is not a cognitive injury. It's a soul injury.
And that's kind of what the moral injury, I think, is a lot of it. And by no means do I think I'm like struggling. I think I'm doing very well now. The last year has been very good. Therapy has been good. Just being honest with myself that it's affected me more. Is that I did make it home. There's 13 people that didn't make it home from those 2 weeks. It's easy to feel sorry for myself. But then as soon as I think about those people, or I think about their families, it's like, I made it home. Like I remember coming home and I went to the beach like immediately after, and I like felt so bad about having fun on the beach. Like I felt so guilty because I know that there was families like grieving, so bad. So I flipped it in my head, I think, over the last year is like, do everything for them, basically, keep living. That's definitely one thing I've learned a lot over the last year too, is that like these feelings are natural. I went through a lot of shit. So it makes sense.
We all know like talking about Afghanistan was terrible and difficult, but I think the real reason why I wanted to talk with you is again, to not be a voyeurist in what you experienced there, but instead what you have decided to do to bring purpose to all of that. So you served, you got out. That was really hard, difficult decision. Tell us a little bit about where you're working now and why you chose to work with them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I got out to be a firefighter, basically. That was what I was going to do. Once I got back up here to Washington, I knew I was going to apply to fire departments. I applied to one, got the job. I got a conditional offer. I didn't get the final offer for some reason, psych eval, whatever happened. And that like really made me super, super mad and down on myself for a long time. I was kind of lost because that was my direction in life that I had thought since getting out of the military, and that was already a hard enough decision. So I was like, if I could surround myself with firemen who are probably mostly veterans anyway, that brotherliness is in the department a lot. I thought I was going to be all right, and not getting that job, it was another kind of like it was a big hit to my ego kind of and confidence. Like I struggled with it a lot. Like I was, after that, I was just sitting around playing video games a lot, not doing anything. And I was really lost. I didn't have any more purpose. And so I actually reached out to Operation Allies Refuge like 3 months after they had started on Instagram. I just saw that they were posting about HKIA, and I was like, I want to be involved with this. Like these are I can identify with you guys,
What were they doing? What were they doing that you saw?
I mean, nothing really besides posting on Instagram. They were posting pictures. They had stories, a lot of stories from people who were at HKIA that were starting to tell their story. Just posting pictures and trying to bring people in, basically. And I liked that because I felt like lost. Like I was out here in Washington. Nobody that I had served with was out here. None of my friends were close out here. So I got involved with them, trying to just find something to do. I don't know. I was going to maybe write my story. And then a couple of days later, I got invited to go to Congress by Scott Mann to testify in front of them about the HVAC hearing. And that really solidified everything that I was going to do, And I wanted to say no so bad to doing that. Like public speaking, I think scares everybody, but I felt really bad at it. I'm not a very good writer. And, if it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't have done it for sure. She encouraged me and she's very smart. She helped me write. And so I testified. And after that, I actually got to meet the founder of OAR because he lives in Virginia. So he was there. He was involved with the trial. So I got to meet him and he got to explaining more of what they were doing, where I could fit in. And after I testified, I had so many friends text me like, I can't believe you did that. Like, I'm so proud of you. People that I really respected also were saying like, thank you for standing up for like the lower enlisted, like and telling your story. This brought on so many emotions. Like I'm finally going to go to therapy because of this. And that really, I was like, okay, I think I found a way to give myself purpose again. So I came back here to Washington and I was just trying to pick Operation Allies Refuge off the ground because it's such a small nonprofit and still is. That basically I took over on the LinkedIn. I was growing the followers on the LinkedIn. I was writing stories, helping wherever I could with Joe. Basically, Joe and I just kind of talked, and I didn't have a job, and a lot of people that I were working with besides Joe have other jobs. So I was able to put 100% of my effort and motivation into it, and it gave me that sense of purpose that I was lacking. And it still is, I'm becoming like a community leader in there, which is what I care about the most. The organization focuses a lot on moral injury. We're doing a lot of education and research on how to possibly treat this and prevent it in the future. We're also doing a lot of historical preservations. We're trying to write a book about, we're trying to be the historical guide for what happened there in HKIA. There's already been a lot of books that come out, but we want to tell the story the most accurate as we possibly can, because I think we've seen, especially people from like the Vietnam area, like they just kind of disappeared and nobody talked about it. Vietnam was hard, but those veterans struggled. I know they did, especially after coming back from all of this and not necessarily being in the best light in the country as veterans, So we just don't want to be forgotten, basically.
As veterans?
Veterans and Afghanistan veterans, I think as time moves on, people who weren't there will be able to, can kind of joke about it was for nothing. Why were you guys over there? And that kind of rhetoric like really hurts veterans, because maybe it was for nothing. I'm not the one to say that, but we still were over there and still had friends die over there, So we're basically we just don't want to be forgotten like that. And we want to set the story right. Like, this is what happened. This is the chaos that was there, and not let the history get, whitewashed like it does so often. But really the big thing that I like is the community of it. The first time I met Joe was the first time that I had met somebody who was in HKIA that wasn't, one of my friends. And the bond I felt with him, you were speaking on it earlier, was crazy. Like, I had never met Joe in my life, but I was like, please be my best friend. Like, just having that like shared connection and able to talk about things that nobody else can besides the 1,000 troops that were on the ground is really important to me. And I care about my community. I was a medic, so I was serving them when I was in, and I want to keep serving them now. So we're just trying to get everybody that was there to come together and be a community, whether they're volunteering for OAR, which has helped me.
There during what happened in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Withdrawal.
Yeah. And absolutely. And we'll eventually, we'll expand it to all Afghan veterans. We're not excluding veterans at all, but my biggest concern is, I think there's been, I don't know, maybe even close to 10. I don't want to say the exact number, but there's been quite a few suicides from coming back from HKIA. And that's just not going to stop, I don't think, unless we get ahead of it.
What do you see a lot of these Afghan veterans experiencing? What are they feeling?
The government didn't give us a lot of recognition afterwards. They tried to forget about it. Nobody really got fired because of it. Nobody got resigned because of it. It obviously wasn't a success. And I don't necessarily feel this, but I think a lot of people just feel fed up, with the government. They were like, my service was, and the worst of it is, my service was for nothing. I lost friends for nothing. That's like the most extreme scenario. But really, I just feel like a lot of people just feel like they lost the purpose, and that motivation is not there. Like, people are just struggling to comprehend like why, what it was all for.
Almost like what to do with themselves now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what is it that you're trying to do through the organization to kind of answer some of that, maybe more specifically?
Well, I don't know if we'll ever be able to answer that. I think that kind of comes internally. Like, what did I do it for? But I just want to bring the communities together and know that they're not alone. I want to set up, community leaders all across the country to get veterans together, and especially HKIA veterans together, to know that they're not alone. Because I think I'm not a rare case. I think a lot of people just went into the woods and were like, I'm never going to think about Afghanistan again. But, and they can do that for however long they want, but I don't think that can last. I don't think there's, longevity with that. So my part of OAR, I want to bring everybody together. I want to give them another sense of purpose, whether that's volunteering with us, that's going out on events with us. Basically just purpose and to know that they're not alone.
I think that is so critical right now. I feel like everything happened so quickly and everything went back towards modernization and back towards preparing for the next thing. That's the biggest concern that I have too, is that there was no reconstitution of the force. There was no rest. There was no respite. There was no talk. There was no debriefing. There was no, it just was like, okay, that's done. Now we have to set our sights on this over here. And I think that through the culture, I feel like the culture had a psychological break at COVID, but then coming out of COVID, it was like, oh my goodness, now we have to deal with Afghanistan. And I think that broke the culture in a way where if we're not going to have a chance to debrief and talk about this, we don't know how to process it. And so we can't just stuff it all inside or sweep it under the rug. And, I think a lot about the Native American tribes and what they used to do, especially in the past, when they would send warriors out and when they would bring warriors back in, warriors would share the story of their battle and share what they did on behalf of the village and share that responsibility and that burden with the village. And the village had to carry and hear the story as part of carrying the burden with them. Like they weren't alone. They were sent on their behalf, but they don't have to carry it anymore by themselves. And so we kind of come back into community and share that together. And now we move forward together. And yet I feel like what a lot of veterans and their families experienced after Afghanistan, especially, was we're just going to tuck you over here and ask you to keep going. And there was no bridging things back. And that's what concerns me the most is, how are we doing? Like, how are we processing?
And that's another big thing with OAR also is that storytelling aspect of it. Like last week, I was just down in Tampa doing Scott Mann's storytelling workshop. And it's what you were saying, like getting their story out there and letting everybody else share that burden is so important. That's a thing we're trying to do is convince people to tell their story, whether it's in an interview setting or it's on a podcast or it's just to us or it's just to themselves to write it down. But yeah, I think that I felt it too, like telling my story to the world, basically. Like I don't feel it. It's not as heavy in my heart anymore because everybody else knows it. And other people are carrying it. And that's a big thing with veterans too, is they don't think they have a story. But everybody's got a story. There's something, we've all been through so much, whether it was in Afghanistan in 2012 or whether it was in 2021, like everybody's got a story that they need to probably tell and get off their shoulders and stop carrying that weight. Because as soon as you tell it, you're like, what the hell? Why was I holding on to this? It's not really that big of a deal. Or at least for me, that was like that, basically.
But how has Katie helped you grow in the last year?
I don't even want to imagine the life without Katie. She is my rock. She knows better than I do now when I'm struggling. Like yesterday, I was really tore up about Afghanistan. I didn't even know it. I was exhausted. With the year coming up, it's all over Instagram. And she could just tell something was bothering me and just asking me like, are you okay? What's going on? Like, I was like, oh yeah, I'm not feeling super great right now. She's always been there for me, whether it was those nights of getting too drunk and throwing up. She was there to rub my back and clean up the throw up. Like, I like to say that kind of almost like our spouses are like the first responders for us. She's always there, and she's always there to put her needs aside. Like when I called her for the congressional hearing, she just put all of her energy into me and making sure that I was okay, that she was gonna be there for me. And then the day of the hearing, she sat right behind me, and I just knew that no matter what happened, I was gonna be able to walk home or walk out of that, holding her hand, that we could go home and live a normal life. So without her, I have no idea. It would probably be dangerous, and we got back. She encouraged me to go to therapy. She encouraged me to speak with my friends, to stay connected with them. So she's done it all. She's amazing. Yeah. If I were to say just one last thing, I think it would just be if anybody was, that was, and it doesn't even, you have to be there in HKI, but if you were affected by HKI, I encourage you to follow Operation Allies Refuge Foundation on Instagram. Just follow what we're doing. We're bringing everybody together, and you can actually be a part of that. Like my mom's a volunteer for OAR. We have a lot of wives and we have mothers who were affected by it. It affected a lot of people just because of how bad it was. And one thing I'll say is I don't like being like the face of this, I guess. I kind of got thrown into it doing the congressional hearing. Never imagined myself being on podcast or telling my story or trying to get more followers or anything. But I just want the community to know it's for them. I want to bring as much light to us as we can. And I want to show that whether you were a specialist that didn't do anything or E7 or an E5 or SF, that we were all there. We all went through the struggle, and we all just need to be able to heal and move forward together.
Regardless of what era you served in and what generation you identify with, war is a reflection of the worst of what humanity can do to each other. Although trauma can stem from the violence of war itself, it is often the silence after war that can cause the most damage. The fear of being forgotten is a very real fear for many. If we can be forgotten, overlooked, and the uniform lacking its original gravitas, it cheapens our priceless decision to put our soul on the line for another. The thought is enough to create a chasm of a different kind within the soul. As divides between generations continue to grow within our ranks, externally as America shifts its attention, and possibly even in our own homes with those we know and should know us, it is often easier to isolate ourselves than to trust that humanity can be capable of something more. Yet there is no other rescue coming. Humanity at its best is the only antidote for the harm we can inflict at our worst. If we are willing, storytelling can be the beginning of that healing, where we vulnerably share our most sacred spaces and remind the world that our priceless acts of service are worth remembering.
Hey America, there's a war going on. In case you didn't know. Hey America, just in case you're wondering, you were the ones who told me to go. Hey America, my friends have died. I wonder if you care. It's so easy to shrug, give your kids a kiss and a hug, and thank God that they ain't over there. Hey America, the president ain't the only one to blame. Hey America, there are 50 states, 485 names. Hey America, how can you stand by and watch as they work for the next election year? It's so easy to shrug, give your kids a kiss and a hug, and thank God that they ain't over there. Well, what about my father? What about my mother? What about my grandparents? What about my brother? What about my wife? What about my sister? What about my daughter? God, how I missed her. What about the lost ones with 1,000-mile stare? What about the broken, imprisoned by their fear? It's so easy to shrug, give your kids a kiss and a hug, and thank God they ain't over there.
The Military Culture Shift podcast is sponsored by New Res and written and produced by me, author, speaker, and military clinical consultant, Corie Weathers. The closing credit song is Hey America, written, produced, and performed by Army veteran James Corbin. This is a supplemental leadership podcast for the book Military Culture Shift, The Impact of War, Money, and Generational Perspective on Morale, Retention, and Leadership. Copies of the book can be purchased on Amazon, militaryfamilybooks.com, and your other favorite retailers. More information, including graphs, data, and other resources mentioned in the book, can be found on my website, CorieWeathers.com.
Hey America, this is from the 1%, sacrificed and without voice. Hey America, next time think long and hard before making your choice. But hey America, go on, sleep well tonight. Tell your children to never be scared. Talk about biting bed bugs, give them a big kiss and a hug, and tell them that's why we're over there. Talk about biting bed bugs, give them a big kiss and a hug, tell them that's why we're